Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nitchman.
Our guest today is Joe Morris Wilkerson, author of Color of Fire. Joe is a former police officer and Marine vet and shares his path to Christ. You can get his book on all major book distributors, including Amazon. You can also find out more about Joe on his Facebook page at JMW Author. Hi, Joe. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Christina?
I'm doing fabulous, and we're so blessed to have you here today. Our wonderful friend Joshua introduced us to you, and you've written a wonderful book called Color of Fire. You are a veteran. You are a law enforcement. You've worked in law enforcement, but you have a fascinating story, and you're going to share that with our audience today. Before we go any further, give a little background to our audience of where you came from and how you came to creating your book.
I grew up with a rodeo cowboy. So if people don't understand that, they are probably the greatest storytellers you'll ever bump into. So I kind of came by the storytelling naturally. So they're a lot like fishermen, you never know when they're telling the truth, telling a lie. So that's why I wrote in fiction, I guess. But early in my life, I became a United States Marine and had lots of experiences. I served during the Vietnam War, although I didn't go, and I wasn't a combat Marine in Vietnam, in country, but I had the privilege of serving with a lot of those guys. And during my stint in the Marine Corps, I was also a military police officer, which kind of introduced me to the law enforcement field. When I got out of the Corps, I went into law enforcement, city, and started working with city departments, not sheriff's departments, and was a SWAT officer, and also worked in the detectives and did a lot of investigation. I had an experience, I guess you could call it, with Jesus Christ. Awesome. When I was about 31, and that's where I became a Christian.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
I'd love to hear about that moment. Was it an aha moment that happened at that one, like, aha moment, or is it like a period of time where you just started to come to be revealed that this is my Lord and Savior? How did that happen for you?
That took about 3 years, actually.
Huh.
And during that 3-year period of time, I had some really good police officer friends of mine who beat me up pretty good because I needed it. I don't want that to sound negative at all, but I was a martial artist. I was a fighter. Very aggressive individual, and it took some aggressive men to bring me to my knees, so to speak. But when I really began to think about it, and these men had been working with me and talking to me about Jesus. One of them happened to be my car partner. Wow. I had just come off of a SWAT call, and it had been a difficult call, and I was sitting at a stoplight about 3 o'clock in the morning going home, and on the radio, there was a man speaking. I don't even know how the radio got to a Christian radio station. A preacher was speaking, and during his sermon, a question kept coming back to my mind: is this all there is to life? And I was about 31 years old at that time, and I needed to find an answer to that question. And that's what really drove me to expand my thought about life and Christ, heaven and hell, and such as that.
Yeah. And I'm guessing from my background, I came from a background of an abusive household, and my dad was kind of aggressive and abusive, and I had a lot of rage in my 20s, and so I was kind of coming at it, well, differently than you, of course. I'm a gal, but I had a lot of rage and a lot of aggressiveness towards men in particular, until I worked on, we forgave each other and had a moment, or not moment, but a time where we both forgave each other. But being in that position where you said you were very aggressive, was it kind of like being in the midst of being a police officer and then before that in the military? Because there's a lot of awful stuff you see. How do you not fall into the darkness when you're around all of that stuff, all that horrible negativity?
Yeah, it's a great question. You don't. If you don't have anything, if you don't have anything beyond yourself, you really don't fall into. You really cannot help but fall into it.
Yeah.
I was, as a matter of fact, I was so aggressive that the department I was working for sent me to a hypnotist and a psychologist in order to teach me how to curb my anger. I was, saying I was aggressive was really kind of an understatement. I was fiercely aggressive and so aggressive that I scared a lot of my partners, my police officer friends, and because of that aggression that I had. So, that's, I don't really like the word balance, but the only place that I could find balance, true balance, the only place that I could find any kind of hope was when I began to recognize Jesus and he began to change me.
Yeah.
There's a true transformation that takes place. And without that transformation, I honestly don't know where I would be today.
Yeah, because you realize you didn't have to do it alone. You're not in this by yourself. You can lean on Jesus and let him take some of the burden. For you and the anger you felt, I know where I was coming from, but was it a sense of injustice that you felt, that you couldn't fix some of the problems on the street, or where was it coming from for you, the kind of anger inside?
I think it came from, although my dad wasn't a violent guy to us, but my mother was extremely violent. And she was a woman that created aggression and anger. And I don't want to earmark all Puerto Ricans, but she grew up with there's a Puerto Rican background to her, and she's half Italian and half Spanish. And it was a very, and her family grew up in Puerto Rico, and she was born in Boston. And I don't want to disparage anybody, but there's a real aggressive nature that comes out of that part of the world and that part of the mentality. And she had that.
Yeah.
And then, you take that and you teach a guy how to be more aggressive, and then you give him power.
Well,
and he even excels in that aggression to the point to where he doesn't know any other way to respond,
Yeah.
And so...
it's interesting, Joe, because like when I became older, my dad was able to sit down with me and my dad, and I was able to forgive him, and he thanked me for forgiving him, because at first he couldn't see that he had done anything wrong when we were kids. But it was a beautiful time because I began to realize that my dad was human, and he grew up during World War II with bombs overhead in Germany. And, he didn't really like Americans very much until he met my mom. But, everyone has their own story. And I don't think anyone comes at the idea as an infant that I want to grow up and be evil or mean. But things happen and you go on a certain course. And it was wonderful that you were able to open your heart to Jesus and allow him to show you a different way. How did becoming Christian change your life after that as a police officer and as a person?
It completely changed my life. Once I began to actually understand that there is a God, that he did send his son, that there is heaven, there is hell, there is such thing as sin and righteousness. I began to basically educate myself. I started going to some men's meetings and working with a particular minister in town who was I don't want to say a tough guy, but a real man's man. And if he hadn't have been that way, I probably wouldn't have given him much thought, you know, because the whole thing with me was that most Christian men that I met, they had no clue. I mean, they would say, be nice and sweet, Joe, and be kind. And I would look at him and say, what? You know, you're telling me to be nice and sweet? So there was, when I began to recognize through this preacher who showed me a picture of Jesus as a warrior and who was a winning, conquering warrior, a God that fought for his people, a God that protected his people. And that's all I wanted to do when it came down to the reality of it, is all I wanted to do was protect people. All I wanted to do was protect the innocent, put the bad guy away. And I did have a hatred for bad guys. I still can't stand bullies. I'm 65 years old today, and I have a real hard time, even today, dealing with bullies. So, not that I don't, and my hard time is I can't let them go on and bully people. That's the hard time I have even today. But a lot of that, I handle it different today. I recognize that there was a transition in where I was in my life and in my character, and how God could lead me to be a man of character, even though having all these dark spots and ugliness in my life, he showed me that I could be a better man and still be a man. And basically the color of fire is exactly that. It's the idea that just because you're an aggressive defender of innocent people, and you may have pulled your weapon and killed people, you may have hurt people during the process of an arrest, you may have blood on your hands as an officer or as a combat veteran. God loves you. God made warriors. And that's something the churches don't teach.
I love that you mentioned this, because often, and I'm in New York, and a lot of times people of a more leftist view will see Jesus as a kind of communist socialist, and he's all, you know, woo you, I don't know, kumbaya. And very weak. Oh, he just loves everyone, everything goes. And I'm like, I don't think you've actually read all of the gospel, because he's a strong individual. What I find about Jesus, he's a strong, quiet guy. I don't think he spoke a lot of words, like a talkative type of person like me, but he is definitely a very strong man, very manly man. And he reminds me of my partner, Brian, because he is a very quiet guy, and people assume that the quiet means he's weak, and he is not weak at all. He is a very strong man with a very strong core. And that is who Jesus is. He is definitely a warrior. But see, a warrior thinks, a lot of time people think a warrior has to go out there blazing with guns, you know, blazing. And sometimes a warrior means standing your ground, even in the most difficult times where everything is against you, which he did at the end.
Absolutely. You know, I had an opportunity to talk to I was at a church in Florida, and the preacher, the man who was teaching the class, was talking about being kind and generous and easy and soft and all of this stuff. And I'm sitting in class, and there's probably 100 people in this class, and all of a sudden this great big guy raises his hands, and he's sitting in front of me, and he raises his hand and he says, you know, I've been a cop for 31 years. How does that gentle kindness work out for me when I have to respond through violent aggression to stop violent aggression? How does God view me? Well, instantly the teacher changed the subject, would not even address it. So after the class was over, I walked up to him and I said, hey man, I shook his hand. And I mean, he was a big boy. He was probably 6'4", 6'5", and thick and strong. And even though he'd been a cop for 31 years, he was still a Superman's man. And I said, you know, I want to tell you this story real quick about Jesus Christ, and it might help you.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't real interested at first. And I said in John chapter 18, verse 1 through 11, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he knows that the bad guys are coming to get him. And a Roman cohort, that's about 600 seasoned Roman fighters,
mm-hmm.
come to him and say, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus, as they're coming into the garden, he approaches them. He doesn't wait for them. He goes to them.
Mm-hmm.
And when he says, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, they all fell down.
Whoa.
All 600 fell backwards. Read the story. It's an absolutely amazing story.
Hmm. That's amazing.
And they all fell backwards. And then Jesus stands there and says, now, who did you say you were looking for? I mean, he asked them a second time, tell me again now who you're looking for. And the whole point was to tell these 600 warriors, you're not taking me. I'll go with you, but you're not going to lay a hand on me. Now, this is what's beautiful about this, because this is the warrior side of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. He just knocked all these men down with his words. He turns, they all get up. He looks at them. He says, you see these men that are with me? And they say, yeah. Don't touch them. You leave them alone.
Mm.
Peter takes the advantage, tries to cut off one of their heads, but misses and chops his ear off. And 600 Roman soldiers still don't take these 12 guys that are with him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've got to understand this. I've been in situations where I don't have a choice but to stand my ground. And if the bad guy becomes aggressive, I have to become super aggressive. If the bad guy hurts one of my guys, all bets are off. He's going to jail or the hospital, or if it's bad enough, he may be going to the morgue.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the three choices I have at that moment. Do you know what?
What?
If a man touches one of my guys, it's over with. I'm in a battle. I'm fighting for blood at that moment.
Yeah.
The 600 Roman soldiers said, okay, we won't touch him, after he cut his ear off.
And Jesus told him to stand down. He told him
Yeah, exactly right.
Everything about that is a warrior, and it's not weak. That is not weak. And some people will be like, why did he go with them? He could have not gone with them, but they're not understanding the true mission of why Jesus came here to begin with. He knew he had a mission to complete, and it was going to be tough. It wasn't easy. And there's times where God puts his will into you, and there's a reason you're put on this planet, a purpose, and sometimes it's going to be really hard. Everything's going to be against you. But,
exactly.
if you fulfill it, God will be by your side. Even if it feels like the world's coming crashing down and it's impossible, it's not.
And that's the beauty of that whole story. The world was crashing down on everybody.
Yeah.
The world was crashing down on Jesus Christ, on his 12 men. And during the crash, he stood without fear. And he says, you're not going to take me. I'll go with you. But do not touch these men that are with me.
Mm.
And they all just said, okay, you want to come on? And Jesus went with them.
Yeah.
So everything about that story says, beware. Jesus Christ is the most powerful powerful man you'll ever meet. And when that story was told to me, it was told to me by a Navy SEAL who was a combat vet and a preacher. And amazing guy. And he said that was the only story that he was told that made me have faith in Jesus Christ.
Mm. Yeah.
It did the same for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that the story you told that 31-year cop that you met who was kind of reluctant to listen?
Yep.
Yeah.
And he, at first he wasn't real interested, but then a few minutes in, after it was over with, and I told him, I said, sometimes even Jesus Christ isn't very nice.
Mm-hmm.
And he just knocked down 600 soldiers. Is that nice?
Yeah, and he didn't have to use the sword to do it, which is amazing.
No, that's the other side. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, sometimes a warrior does have to use a weapon, but sometimes just your words can be powerful, and that in itself is amazing. To be able
just
to
standing your ground. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, what do you hope people will take away? The greatest thing you hope people will take away from Color of Fire?
well, it's a pretty exciting book. There's some truth to fiction, and it's drawn out of my experiences and the experiences of other friends of mine, other men that I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nice, that's the outer wrapping of the package. That's not really what I want people to be interested in specifically.
Mm-hmm.
What I want them to be interested in is the biblical information that's in that book.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to see a strong police officer, a strong, former Marine, and he's got a team, and they're former military and former law enforcement, and they're saving people's lives. And there's some truth to this. And in that saving of people's lives, they ask the same question: is this all there is to life? Mm-hmm. One guy does specifically. His name is Brady Cole, and Brady asks a specific question: is this all there is? And when he asks that question, things begin to happen. He knows that there's a man they call the priest who helps him understand some aspects of Christ, who introduces him to a woman who expands that idea of who Christ Jesus is. Mm-hmm. And during that walk, he is more and more in tune with what's going on, although he doesn't become a Christian in this first book, and there's some sequels to this.
Nice.
But there is also other people in the book, other characters who are severely struggling with their Christianity or their sinfulness.
Yeah.
And God deals with each one of these people in specific ways. And in that dealing, biblical truths are represented, and those biblical truths, are expounded on in a manner that draws people closer to Jesus or pushes them away because of what they believe and how they're living their lives. Mm-hmm. So what I want people to take away from this is the fact that Jesus Christ is real, that there are answers. Paul says in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation." And that word power is dynamos. Mm-hmm. It's where we get our word dynamite or dynamo. Mm-hmm. And it is the actual working of the Holy Spirit in our lives through the spoken word of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And that's the biblical account. The biblical words that are there, they have power. Mm-hmm. And if we can introduce people to those powerful words, we'll change the world. We'll change that individual. But if we're progressive enough with it and forceful enough with it, and I don't mean that in a negative manner, mm-hmm. but in a very positive, standing your ground manner, we'll change the world for the good of the gospel of Christ.
Absolutely. And what I love about your whole story, Joe, is that you're a man, and a lot of men today in this modern world are not feeling where they belong. We're kind of a little off target and off the path of understanding. We're going further and further away from God and pushing away in our society. And now we're even being told men shouldn't be men; they should be feminists, and be a feminine kind of woman. And so a man's like, well, do I pick up the tab when I go to a restaurant with the girl, or should I just allow her to do it so she feels strong, or should I hold the door? Or what do I do? I don't know where I belong. And what's awesome about your story and telling the story of Jesus is that you can be strong. You don't have to be aggressive where you hurt people, but just standing your ground and being who God made you to be, which is a man. And there's nothing wrong with the man. There's nothing wrong with the woman. We both have our individuality, our individual strength that God made.
Amen. That is so true.
Yeah.
That is so true. I was in a parking lot one day, And I just came out of the store, and I was sitting there, and I watched a couple walk across the parking lot. It happened to be a mixed race couple, with a black man, tall, strong black man, and a real petite white gal that was just really a pretty girl, and they had a little a boy with them, and they were walking across the parking lot, and I don't know what caught my eye about them other than the fact that they were a very attractive couple, and as they walked, they got to the car, and the man opened the door for the young boy, and he jumped in, and then he walks around, tells his wife not to open the door, walks around, opens her door, helps her in the car, shuts the door. And there was just something about that whole little scene that played out. I drove over to them, and I pulled up beside the car and rolled my window down. Here I am, this old white guy, and this young, strapping, strong black gentleman rolls his window down, and he looks at me with a real big question on his face, like, what's fixing to happen?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't see what you did very often. And he looked at me funny, and he says, what do you mean what I did? I said, and this is what got me about it. Everything this big, strong man did was full of absolute love for those two people. Yeah. And yet, here he was, this powerful 6 foot, 3 or 4 inch tall, really stout, well-built black guy who did not have to do any of that. Could have got in the car, made her open her own door, typical of everybody else, but that's not what he chose to do. He chose to be a man and humble himself and serve his family and not be served by them. That's what really caught my attention. And she looked across the car at me, and she said, I love him because he is a strong gentleman.
Yes. And I think people have forgotten about what that means to be a strong gentleman and a protector. He's a provider, a protector. There's nothing wrong with it. And there's nothing wrong. A woman has her own, strengths. It's different, but you don't have to go out and be a man. I mean, for years growing up here in New York, I was confused working in corporate America, trying to actually put on that male persona and losing my own my actual femininity that was given by God. And the beauty of it is that. And now I've gained it back, and I'm very happy that I realized the gifts I've already been given. I don't need to be a man. I already have a wonderful partner that Brian is a man and very strong and wonderful. But I'm so glad you told that story, because there is a place for both males and females, and you don't have to compete with each other to be the better sex. There's no better sex.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what makes the relationship so wonderful, is that I had no doubt in my mind that things went sour, that man who loved those two people so much would have jumped out there in front of the bullet or in front of the knife and protected the love of his life,
Yeah.
And yet he can, because of that strength, he can afford to be gentle and kind and humble himself in a manner that honors other people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of the whole relationship. You let me be the strong guy and let me protect, and you be the woman who's a strong woman and a support for me as I support and honor you,
Yeah.
And if boys can understand that today, their relationships will soar, I think.
Absolutely. And women too, that, there's not, you have to submit and be weak. Submitting to your husband and allowing and supporting him, and the way, actually, I've seen Melania do awesome with her husband Trump. In my lifetime, have not seen a first lady be such a great support for their husband. And I admire it so much. It's so beautiful. And to realize that doesn't make her weak. I see her strong, very strong.
Oh, yeah.
And it really, It's so beautiful. Well, I have to tell you, Joe, this has been such a fascinating talk. Tell everyone where they can find out more about you and get your awesome book, Color of Fire.
Well, I have a website. Website. You can go to JMW. I'm still not very technically. I am technically challenged. So there's a Facebook. You can just go on Facebook and go to JMW. There's a link that it will take you right into Amazon. You can get the Kindle version or the paperback book. It's a great read. It's exciting. Everybody that has left all of the reviews and everybody that's talked about it said that they couldn't put it down, which is, the first book I've ever put out. And it's kind of strange that they say that to me, that they find it that intriguing. So that's encouraging, and I think everybody will find a great read.
Yeah, I know they will. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. I'm downloading it today, and I just have to thank you so much for sharing your blessings, your testimony, and your wonderful lessons that you've learned throughout your life. Thank you so much for coming to Savvy Business Radio.
Thank you so much, Christina. God bless you.
God bless.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.